Hey, my name is Noah. I'm 30 years old, and I live in the ground floor unit of a duplex on Garfield Street, just outside Millbrook, Tennessee, a town of about 6,000 where the main street has a diner, a hardware store, a pharmacy, and a barber shop, and where most of the county works either at the distribution center on Route 9 or at the county hospital 2 miles out on Cedar Road. I'm an electrician. I've been doing residential and light commercial wiring since I got my license at 22, and I've been running the business on my own since I was 25, when my boss Raymond semi-retired and handed me his client list in exchange for keeping his name on the signage, which we both agreed was fair. I wire new construction, upgrade old panels, troubleshoot problems that other contractors created, and replace what time and poor judgment have made unreliable. The work is invisible. That is the fundamental nature of it. Nobody looks at a wall and thinks about what's inside it. They flip a switch and expect the light to come on, and as long as it does, they never think about me at all. I learned early that there are 2 ways to feel about that. You can resent it, or you can take a particular kind of satisfaction in it. The satisfaction of work that disappears correctly into the structure of things and holds them up without requiring any acknowledgement. I chose the second way. I have never fully been able to explain that choice to anyone, but it is the one I would make again. My daily routine goes like this. Up at 5:30, coffee made the night before so I can pour without waiting, drive to the first job by 6:30, work through the afternoon, stop at the parts supplier if I need anything, drive home by 5 or 6. I make something for dinner that doesn't require much attention. Something from a pan, something I can eat standing at the counter while I check the next day's schedule. I sit on the front step if the weather is right. I go to bed before 10 because 5:30 in the morning is its own argument. On weekends I handle the small calls that came in during the week. A tripped breaker, a socket that stopped working, a porch light someone's been meaning to get to since summer. I keep my phone face down on the counter when I get home, not because I'm expecting messages, because I'm not. I am not, as I have had to remind myself a few times over the past couple of years, a lonely person in any dramatic sense. Raymond calls on Tuesday evenings to ask about jobs I've finished that he would have done differently. My neighbor Dale and I have an ongoing informal loan arrangement involving tools neither of us ever fully returns. I drive out to see my mother in the next county over twice a month, and she feeds me things and says nothing about the fact that I come alone. I have friends. I have a life. It has its particular shape, and I have grown accustomed to that shape, which is a thing you say when you have gotten very used to something and stopped examining what you've gotten used to. 2 years ago, I was with a woman named Paige for 3 years. She was warm and sociable, and she needed words from the people she loved. She needed to be told things, plainly, in language, without having to interpret what an action meant. I am not naturally a man who works that way. I show up. I do the work. I fix what is broken and make sure it holds, and then I show up again the next day and do it again, and I assume that this communicated everything it needed to communicate. It did not. She told me once, toward the end, that loving me felt like trying to read a book that had been written entirely in diagrams. I sat with that for a long time. I still think the diagrams were the book. But I understood eventually that a book that can only be read by the person who wrote it has not entirely fulfilled its purpose. She moved to Nashville in the fall, and I rewired an outlet I'd been meaning to fix for 6 months because I didn't know what else to do with a Tuesday evening. And that was that. The spare room in my duplex had Dale's extra level and 3 boxes of materials I hadn't sorted and a window that looked out onto Garfield Street. And I told myself I'd deal with it eventually, and eventually had not yet arrived. That Saturday in late August came in on me the way the important days usually do, without signaling itself, during something ordinary. I had been at the hardware store for 90 minutes past when I'd intended, chasing a part I could have ordered online but had convinced myself I could find locally. And I was tired and running later than I'd wanted, and all I had on my mind was getting home, putting the kettle on, and sitting down for an hour in a room where no one needed anything from me. I turned onto Garfield, and the U-Haul van was parked half on the sidewalk in front of the building 3 doors down, the rental unit that had been sitting vacant all spring. The back doors were still wide open. A woman was in the doorway of the building with a box that was clearly heavier than she'd estimated, trying to manage the door handle and the box simultaneously, and she was losing the argument. I sat in the truck with the engine running. I was tired. I had been on my feet since 6 that morning. She had probably called someone. She was going to figure it out. I sat there and thought all of these things. And then I thought about how the box was not going to get lighter, and the door was not going to hold itself open, and she was not going to call it a fine day and leave. And I put the truck in park. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had come mostly apart, with pieces sticking to her neck in the heat. She was wearing an old university sweatshirt, the school name faded to the point of being barely readable across the chest, and canvas sneakers that had known better years. There was a streak of cardboard dust across her forearm, where she'd been bracing the box against the door frame, and her expression was the one I recognized from people dealing with a problem that is beneath their abilities, but is still, right now, winning. "I can take the other side of that," I said. She flinched slightly, just the involuntary jolt of someone who hadn't heard footsteps. Not afraid. Surprised, she looked at me with the quick, evaluating attention of a woman deciding whether a stranger offering help was something to accept or something to be careful about. Something settled in her face. "Thank you," she said. "I've got it." "I know," I said. "Where does it go?" A pause. Then, 2nd floor. The door on the left. We carried the box up and set it on the kitchen floor of an apartment that was empty and clean and bright. South-facing windows, good afternoon light, white walls, everything waiting. She thanked me. I said I had some time if she needed another set of hands. She looked at me with the expression of someone whose pride and practical sense are having a direct conversation. "I had a friend coming," she said. "She had to leave 2 hours ago. I have about 15 more boxes in the van." 15 boxes, I said. "I can do that." Her name was Lena. She had been living across town for 4 years in an apartment that was hers and her boyfriend's, and when it stopped being that, it had needed to stop being hers too. The new place was smaller. The kitchen window looked out on a fire escape and a slice of afternoon sky. She said it was exactly what she needed, which was a sentence with more than one meaning and which I understood, from the careful flatness with which she said it, to mean, it is mine alone, and that is the entire point. We worked for 2 hours. She was methodical in a way I found immediately comfortable. Every box labeled in black marker, a hand-drawn diagram on a folded piece of paper showing the layout of the apartment and where each category of things should land. The diagram was detailed in the way of someone who thinks in terms of systems. I looked at it and handed it back without commenting on it. And she noticed that I hadn't commented on it, and something in her expression shifted in a way I couldn't quite read at the time. By the time the van was empty, the sky had gone orange, and she had made 2 glasses of water from a jug she'd been smart enough to pack in the first box. We stood in her still bare living room and drank them. She said, "I don't even know your name." "Noah," I said. 3 doors down. She looked at me with something between surprise and something else. "Of course," she said. I said I hoped she'd like the building and that if anything needed fixing, she should knock. She said that was a strange thing to offer a stranger. I said I was an electrician and it was an occupational habit. She laughed, one surprised, genuine sound, and said she'd keep it in mind. I walked home in the orange light and made the tea I'd been intending to make for 3 hours, and I sat on my front step and thought about a woman with a faded sweatshirt and a hand-drawn moving diagram, and about how the way a person moves into a new space tells you more about them than almost anything they say. The first thing I noticed about her apartment, from the outside on the evenings when she was home before dark, was that the kitchen light was wrong. The overhead had been installed dead center in the ceiling, which sounds correct. But given the position of the counter and where a person actually stands to prepare food, it placed the light source directly behind whoever was working, which meant their own shadow fell forward across the cutting board every time they used it. It was a small problem. It would bother her every single evening, and she would never be able to name exactly why. I noticed it in the second week. I said nothing about it. It wasn't my place. But it lodged in the back of my head the way things do when I know they're not right and haven't been addressed yet. By the third week, she had started leaving her windows open in the evenings. I learned her schedule from her lights, gone before 6:30 most mornings, back between 6 and 9, sometimes later. When she was home, there was always light in the kitchen window first. She cooked before she did anything else, which was itself a piece of information about her. I fixed her doorbell on a Tuesday in the third week while she was at work. Some previous tenant had painted over the button, which was enough to break the circuit. 8 minutes, no tools beyond what I carry in my jacket. I did not leave a note. She worked it out when a colleague came by that Friday and got in on the first ring. She came to find me over the low fence the following Saturday morning while I was loading my truck, and she said, without preamble, "That was you." The doorbell. "It wasn't working," I said. She looked at me for a moment, with the same evaluating attention she'd used on moving day. "There are 2 outlets in my bathroom that don't work," she said. "I know," I said. "I noticed when we were carrying boxes." A pause. "Okay," she said, and went back inside. I fixed the outlets the following Saturday. She made me lunch and we ate at her kitchen table, the one she'd assembled herself on the first weekend, and she told me the table had one crooked leg she hadn't been able to fix, and I said I'd look at it, and she said she wasn't asking me to, and I said I knew. Which was not a contradiction. That was how it began, or how it continued. I cannot fully identify where the line was. The arrangement that developed over the following weeks had not been discussed or agreed to. It simply arrived, the way good arrangements do, through the logic of 2 people whose habits were compatible. I fixed things in her apartment: the table leg, the thermostat that ran cold, the light switch in the hallway that needed its wiring reseated. She fed me at irregular intervals, and with a specificity that I came to recognize as her equivalent of the same impulse. She remembered, without being asked, that I drank my coffee without sugar. She showed up once at a job I was finishing late. I'd mentioned it in passing that morning, with a container of soup she'd made before a long shift, because she'd known I wouldn't stop to eat. I sat in my truck at dusk and ate it, and thought about how Raymond had once said that the best thing another person can do for you is pay attention without being asked. I had agreed with him in a vague way at the time. I agreed more specifically now. We ran into each other at the corner store on a Thursday morning at 5:45, both of us heading to early starts. She was still wearing her hospital badge from the night before. She had worked a 12-hour overnight and come straight back out for milk, because she had run out and considered this non-negotiable, which was something I understood about her without needing to ask. She looked at the pre-made coffee I was buying from the hot case and said she had a proper pot going if I wanted to come by before my first job. I said that was all right. She said it wasn't a big deal. I said I was already running later than I should be. She said okay, and went to pay for her milk. I stood there for a moment with my terrible coffee and thought about the fact that I had just declined an offer I had no reason to decline, which was a particular kind of stupid I had a documented history of committing. I knocked on her door at 6:20. She handed me a real cup without making anything of it and went back to making toast. And I stood in her kitchen and drank it and looked out the south-facing window at the early light coming up over the rooftops. We didn't talk much. She was still running on the tail end of the overnight, and I was still loading my head with the day's first job. But the kitchen was warm, and the coffee was correct, and there was something easy about the silence that had not been there on moving day. She told me once, around the 4th week, that when she'd first seen me get out of the truck that Saturday, she'd assumed I was someone with somewhere else to be who was pausing briefly, and that she'd fully expected me to carry one box and disappear. She said it the way you say something you've been privately thinking about for a while. I told her I had almost driven past. She gave me the look she used when something she'd suspected was confirmed. "That's very you," she said. Almost the word stayed with me. I thought about it more than I needed to. The afternoon she surprised me came about 5 weeks after she'd moved in. I was replacing a junction box on a run I'd been doing at a new construction on the east side of town, and I had put a clip on a wire bundle that caught the side of my hand on the way off. A clean cut, not deep, but the kind that bleeds with the dedicated enthusiasm of hand cuts. I wrapped it in a shop rag and kept working. Lena had come by to drop off a key she'd borrowed and found me in the driveway, and she looked at the shop rag the way I look at a panel that's been wired wrong. "Come here," she said. I said I was fine. She gave me the look she probably gave children who said they were fine, and I came there. She had a small kit in her bag, the kind of kit you carry when you are the kind of person who is always the most useful person in any given emergency. She cleaned the cut with practiced economy, applied pressure for 30 seconds, and closed it with a butterfly bandage from the same bag, all in under 2 minutes, with the particular stillness of a person doing something they have done so many times that it no longer requires thought. "You're a nurse," I said. "Pediatric," she said, wrapping a piece of tape around the last edge. "County Hospital." I looked at the finished bandage. She had done it correctly, better than I would have done it myself, and I am not careless about that kind of thing. "How do you do that every day?" I said. "The children." She was quiet for a moment. "Same way you do what you do," she said. "You trust that if you get the work right, the thing holds. And you try not to spend too much time thinking about what it means if it doesn't." I had not thought about what I did in that way before. I thought about it often, after that evening. The real conversation, the one that happened in the middle, the way the real conversations always do, came about 6 weeks in. On a Wednesday night in late September, when she got home from a shift that had taken something from her in the specific way certain shifts do. I could see it in the way she walked up the steps to her building, not defeated, just emptied out, the particular quality of someone who has used up everything they had and is walking home to refill. I was on my front step. She stopped at the fence. "Bad shift?" I said. She sat down on the top step of her building's stoop, across the fence from me, close enough to talk without raising her voice. "Not bad," she said. "One of those ones that goes the right way. Those are sometimes the hardest." I knew what she meant. There are jobs where everything is fine, where you catch the problem before it becomes a failure, where the work holds exactly the way it should, and you come home feeling not relieved, but wrung out. Because you were holding a particular kind of tension for hours, and the releasing of it takes something too. She told me about it, without giving me the details she wasn't supposed to share, just the outline of it. The weight of a small person who had been frightened, and the specific moment when the frightened thing became okay. The way some moments feel enormous not because they are dramatic, but because of what they were about to become and didn't. When she was done, I sat with it for a moment. When I was learning, I said, Raymond used to say, the best job is the one where nothing goes wrong and nobody ever has to know how close it got. I used to think that was depressing. You do all this work, and the whole point is that nobody notices. It's not depressing, she said. No, I said. I worked out eventually that it's the whole point. You do it right, and people just go on living their lives inside the structure you built. That's what it's for. She looked at me across the low fence. The evening was cooling down rapidly, the kind of September evening where the temperature drops at dusk without warning, and she had her arms around her knees. I used to need people to understand what I was doing, she said. To see it. Not the outcome, the work itself. It took me a long time to stop needing that. What changed? I said. She was quiet for a moment. I was with someone for 4 years who I don't think ever really wanted to know, she said. Not just the work. Me, underneath it. He was interested in the version of me that was simple to understand. When I wasn't simple, when the job was hard, or when I needed something I couldn't explain easily, he got very quiet in a way that meant he was waiting for it to pass. She paused. I spent a long time trying to make him understand it, and when I stopped, it wasn't because I'd given up on him. It was because I finally understood that wanting to be known by someone who doesn't want to know you is its own kind of bad wiring. She looked at me. You can have all the right materials and still have a circuit that doesn't work. If the connection isn't there, nothing runs. Yeah, I said. That's exactly right. The fence between us was barely 2 feet high. She was close enough that I could see, in the low evening light, the particular tiredness around her eyes that was different from the ordinary tired of a long shift, older than that and deeper, the kind of tired that comes from a long time of trying. What about you? She said. I told her about Paige, about the 3 years and the things she had said, that loving me was like reading a book written entirely in diagrams. I said I had thought for a long time that this was a misunderstanding of what a book could be. I said I now thought that was probably too convenient a position. People need different things, she said. Yeah, I said, and some of those things I'm not good at giving. I know that. Which things? I thought about it. Saying it, I said. Out loud. When there's nothing to do with my hands. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very evenly, what would you say if you said it? I looked at her. The evening light was nearly gone, and the first of her kitchen lights was on behind her, and she was looking at me with the same clear attention she brought to everything that mattered to her. I don't know yet, I said, which was honest, but I think I've been trying to find out. She nodded once, slowly, the way she nodded at things she already understood. Then she reached across the low fence and put her hand briefly over mine, where it rested on my knee. 1 second. Maybe 2. The weight of it was specific and deliberate and warm. Then she said she needed to eat something and went inside, and I sat on my front step in the cooling air and looked at the lit windows of her kitchen and thought about circuits and about the difference between materials that are correct and connections that are. The ex came on a Sunday afternoon in mid-October, 2 months after she'd moved in, to collect the last of his things. I happened to be at her apartment. She'd asked me to look at the bathroom ventilation fan, which had developed a rattle, when she got the text that he was coming by in an hour. She didn't say anything about it. She handed me a screwdriver and went into the kitchen and started doing something with onions, which was how she dealt with things she was waiting out. He was polite, neatly dressed, the kind of man who moves through the world without encountering much that resists him. He shook my hand with the brief, calibrated politeness of a man taking stock and filing it. He moved through the apartment, gathering things, a box of books he'd been putting off collecting, a charger, a jacket. With the careful manners of someone who wants it, noted that he is conducting himself well. At the door he paused. He said the apartment was small. He said it with what appeared to be genuine concern, which was more uncomfortable than if he had been dismissive. He said he just wanted to make sure she was okay here. She said she was fine. He said if she ever wanted to talk about the property decision, she interrupted him then, quietly, without raising her voice. "I appreciate you coming. The last of your things are in the box by the door." He looked at the box, and then at me, and then at her, and nodded once and left. I had gone back to the fan while they were at the door. I finished tightening the mounting screw and turned it on. It ran clean. I packed my tools. When I came out, Lena was at the kitchen counter with her hands flat on the surface, looking at the wall in front of her. Not crying, not visibly upset, just still, in the way of someone who has completed something they are glad to have done and is waiting to feel what comes next. "Fan's fixed," I said. "Thank you," she said. I picked up my bag. She said, "Without turning, you could stay. I made enough food for someone who hasn't been eating since this morning." She looked at me sideways. "Which I know you haven't." She was right. I stayed. We ate at the kitchen table, the one with the leg I'd fixed, and she talked about a case from the week that had gone well, and I talked about a panel job in the new construction on the east side of town that was taking longer than it should because the framing contractor had made decisions that no electrician had signed off on. We stayed at the table long past the food being finished. The apartment felt, by the time the evening was fully dark, like a place I had been coming to for years rather than 2 months. I noticed, on the way out, the shadow that fell from the overhead light onto her cutting board. I noticed it the way I always did, and I said nothing, and I went home. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening in the last week of October, I came by after work with a junction box, a length of track rail, and an lead fixture I'd pulled from a job where the client had changed direction. I knocked, and she opened the door and looked at what was in my hands. "The overhead light in your kitchen is in the wrong position," I said. "Given where the counter is and where you stand when you cook, your shadow falls forward onto the cutting board. It's been doing it since before you moved in. The previous tenant probably never cooked. I've been meaning to fix it since the second week you were here." She looked at me for a moment. "You've been noticing my kitchen light for 2 months. I've been noticing that it's wrong," I said. "Which is different, but yes." She stepped back and let me in. The job was straightforward. I moved the circuit point to the wall side, ran the track to throw the light at an angle instead of straight down, positioned the lead to cover the full counter width without creating shadow interference from whoever was standing there. 25 minutes, a small amount of drywall repair that I patched and would come back to paint, and a cleanup that left the kitchen looking undisturbed except for one fixture that was now in the right place. When I was done, I said her name. She was in the doorway watching. She had been watching the whole time, quietly, in the way she watched things she was interested in. I asked her to come stand at the counter the way she normally stood when she was cooking. She crossed the kitchen and stood in her place, facing the counter. I turned on the track. The light came down clean and even across the cutting board, across the full width of the workspace, across her hands. No shadow. The counter was bright and clear, and every detail on it was visible. She stood there without moving for a moment. She looked at her hands in the new light. Then she looked at the fixture and at the angle it was throwing. And then she looked at me across the kitchen, still holding the wall switch. And in a voice that was quiet, in the way of something said almost to herself. The way you say something when it has been sitting inside you for a long time and finds its way out without being sent. Why are you so perfect? I turned off the testing light. I set the switch cover back in its plate. I stepped down off the stool I'd been using and put it against the wall. I could have deflected. I had a number of deflections available to me: the junction box, the wiring angle, the fact that I merely disliked things that weren't correct. I had spent a long time expressing what I meant through correct wiring and fixed doorbells and a soup container delivered to a job site at dusk. I had told myself that these things communicated everything that needed to be communicated. A woman had once told me that was not true. I had agreed with her eventually, after she was already gone. I'm not, I said. I'm a man who fixed your doorbell without telling you because I cannot walk past something that isn't working, who noticed the shadow on your cutting board in the second week and sat on it for 2 months because it didn't feel like my place to say something, who has been finding reasons to be here because I don't know how to say the thing that's true without having something to do with my hands first. I stopped. I'm not perfect. I've been trying to give you a reason to know I'm paying attention, which you probably already knew. But I wanted to say it where you could hear it. She looked at me across the kitchen. The light was off now, just the ambient glow from the hallway, and she was standing at her counter in the near dark. Noah, she said. Her voice was steady. I have known for at least 3 weeks. I was waiting for you to just say it. I'm saying it now, I said. I know, she said. Come here. The distance was 4 steps. We closed it at the same time. The kiss arrived without ceremony, the way real things do, not tentative, not performed. And it had in it every Tuesday evening, and every replaced outlet, and every conversation across the low fence in the cooling down dark of late September. She had her hand at the back of my neck, and I had mine at the back of hers, and the kitchen around us was quiet, and the light was, as of tonight, exactly right. She had her head on my shoulder after, and I was leaning against the counter, and she said into my shoulder, "The table leg you fixed wobbles again." I noticed, I said. Were you going to mention it? I was going to fix it, I said. Mentioning wasn't part of the plan. She laughed, real and unguarded and close enough that I felt it as much as heard it, and it was better than any version of it I'd heard through the window across the fence. By February she knew Raymond and my mother and my neighbor Dale, and all 3 of them had formed opinions about her within 45 minutes of meeting her. Every one of those opinions positive, all arrived at through the same method. She paid attention to them the way she paid attention to everything, without making a performance of it, and people feel that even when they can't name it. Raymond said, at the end of an evening she'd joined us for at the shop, that she was the kind of person who sees clearly and decides to stay anyway, and that this was the only kind of person worth knowing. She heard him and said nothing, but her hand found mine under the table, and I took that as agreement. By the following spring she had moved into the duplex. She brought the faded sweatshirt and the hand-labeled boxes, and because that is how she approaches things she cares about. A new, hand-drawn diagram of where everything should go, even though she already knew the layout, even though we had discussed it. The diagram went on the refrigerator because I found it and liked the fact that it existed and didn't want to file it somewhere. She found it there a week later and left it where I'd put it and didn't say anything about it, which was her way of saying everything. I still do the same work. I wire new construction, upgrade old panels, troubleshoot what other people have gotten wrong. Raymond still calls on Tuesday evenings. I still drive to the supplier before it opens and come home in the dark. The work is still invisible, the way it has always been. You do it right, and the circuit holds, and nobody has to think about what you did or why. The lights come on. Things work. That's all it needs to do. The difference is that now when I come home, the lights in the duplex are already on. Someone is in the kitchen, or in the chair by the window with her feet up, or coming down the hall with her hair still damp from the shower. And the particular quiet that used to be the whole sound of the house has changed into something else. Not louder, just fuller. The way a room sounds when it is being used for what it was built for. I used to believe that the best work was the work that became invisible. That if you did it correctly, nobody would ever need to think about it again. They would just live their lives inside the structure you had made, and the structure would hold, and your job was done. I still believe that about wiring. You do it right, and it disappears into the walls, and it holds for 50 years without anyone having to think about why. But there is another kind of work. The kind you do in the light, on purpose, for a specific person, in a way that can be seen. Not because you need the acknowledgement. Because the person on the other side of it deserves to know it was deliberate. That you noticed the shadow, that you came back for it, that the whole point, from the beginning, was her. Some things you build to be invisible. Some things you build so that someone can finally see clearly. It turns out, I had been learning to do both.